tell me when you want me to start, Mara.
Yeah, you're good to go. Thanks.
Okay. I will share screen. And let's go from the beginning. All right. So welcome to Climate and Energy 101. And we're going to basically focus on energy generation and health impacts and different policy solutions, really sort of what's going on at the federal and state level right now. And then opportunities for participation, because of course, we always want to let people, be active and get people activated to make changes. So learning objectives, 2 chemicals that I'm going to this for a second. There we go. 2 chemicals that contribute to adverse health effects when they are released through the burning of fossil fuels, 3 health problems linked to poor outdoor air quality, and 2 strategies to reduce fossil fuel reliance. So let's start off with just US electricity generation by energy source. And this chart is actually a couple of years old. So you'll see in the next table how things are, starting to change. So this was 2017. And so the bulk was from natural gas. Coal was at 27.4. Michigan is higher, which you'll see a little bit later. But we're still very reliant on fossil fuels. You'll see down below, renewables are a significantly smaller portion of US energy generation. These, which I know are pretty impossible to see, but there's not a lot available from 2019 yet, or 2020 yet, because all of the numbers are preliminary, but you'll see that the numbers has increased as far as natural gas, while coal has gone down. And that's been the trend over the last several years. You'll also, as you go down a little bit, we'll see that renewables are actually ticking up across the US. So in Michigan, in 2019, Michigan used about 32% of its electricity generation was from coal. That's still higher than the national average, although we are also going down, and there are lots of coal plants that are scheduled to be shut down over the next 5, 10, 15 years. You'll see in 2014 it was more than 50%. So we are moving pretty rapidly away from coal, which is good news, except natural gas tends to be the largest replacement for electricity generation. Natural gas provided more than 30% in 2019. Nuclear right now accounts for 28%. That hasn't changed. There isn't any new nuclear, and there isn't likely to be any becoming. Renewables were only at 10%. When we get to sort of Michigan policies, you'll see that we're supposed to reach 15% by the end of this year, and we're on track to do that. But still, we are highly dependent on fossil fuels. So this map just sort of shows the black triangles are the coal plants, the blue flames are the natural gas. So, this is not just a Michigan issue, this is a Midwest issue. So I want to talk a little bit about the fossil fuel life cycle, because like I said, coal, getting rid of coal is a good thing, but replacing with natural gas, and I know you'll hear and you see all sorts of ads about how great natural gas is and how clean it is, but not really. So there are harmful air pollutants that come from burning coal. Coal is definitely dirtier. We're not going to argue that natural gas isn't less dirty than coal, but it's still not healthy and still dangerous. So acid gases, benzene, dioxin, formaldehyde, and then all of these pollutants are associated with different health impacts, asthma and COPD being at the top, but really just any kind of lung problems. Also associated with heart attacks and strokes, potential for birth defects and premature death, and then there's other information that suggests that really attacks all sorts of other systems as well. So breathing in air pollution is definitely harmful to health. And we've seen over the last year during COVID how those communities that are most impacted by air pollution have had some of the worst outcomes with COVID. So just to get an idea of how small this air pollution is and how much we're breathing in, this is sort of an example of the size of a human hair versus particulate matter 2.5, which is really the bulk of what's being thrown out into the air by the coal plants. And so you'll see it's pretty small and so really easy to breathe in. So with particulate matter, particles get very deep into the airways. Inhalation leads to inflammation, oxidative stress, autonomic changes, and impacts throughout the body. The populations that tend to be most vulnerable: children, elderly, and those with pre-existing conditions. Again, I go back to the populations that have been highest impacted by COVID, tend to be communities that are breathing in all sorts of air pollution, which then results in pre-existing conditions, making them more vulnerable. Ozone is another problem. You'll see sort of where VOCs and nitrogen oxides combine to make ozone. And we have in Michigan a number of ozone day warnings that happen throughout the year. They get particularly worse in the summer, but it makes it also, again, harder to breathe. So sunburn in the lungs is sort of just a description of it, but basically when you breathe in and your lungs actually hurt, it can again create a variety of health problems. And then ozone levels can actually be, you can attribute a number of deaths per year because of ozone. So this is an example, again, from a few years ago, but numbers based on county and sort of estimates about where there have been increasing deaths because of exposure. Mercury, another chemical, which ends up not only in our air, but in our water as well, and impacts fish and goes up through the whole food chain. So we end up ingesting it. This is particularly dangerous to pregnant women and babies. So in 2016, coal plants in Michigan discharged 48,697 pounds of toxic pollutants. They also generate coal ash, which contain mercury, arsenic, lead, and other toxic heavy metals all into our waterways. The 13 largest coal plants generated more than 1.4 million tons of coal ash waste in 2016. And I don't have the most recent numbers. It's gone down some, again, as coal use has gone down and some of these plants have been shuttered. But it's not, the amount of pollution is still pretty significant. So as of 2016, it was 29 coal ash sites, 35 unlined coal ash ponds. And as far as the lining, that's something that there was actually a law that required them to be lined at one point. And sometime around 2012, some of those requirements were lifted under the previous governor and legislature. So putting our waters more at risk. Okay, on to natural gas. So in 2019, it was 30% of our primary energy consumption. Again, natural gas produces less carbon than coal plants, but still, sends a whole bunch of pollution into the air, including a whole lot of methane emissions, mostly from the wells. And this is where we get into the life cycle. It's not just the power generation, but the extraction that makes it really dangerous to our climate and our health. So a natural gas well in its lifetime will have 1.7 to 6% of its total emissions of methane. So why does methane matter? We keep talking about carbon. Both are fossil fuels, both are emissions that cause climate change. The lifespan of methane, though, is longer, and it's more potent. So it traps heat and contributes to climate change in a bigger way. So as we move away from coal, if we go to replacing everything with natural gas, we end up in a situation where we're actually contributing to climate change more. And so I'm not talking a lot about this in this presentation, but things are moving now as we move to more renewables for generation. We are talking a lot more about electrification, not just of the power grid, but for automobiles and homes. So you'll hear things about replacing gas heaters with electrified heat pumps, and then obviously the auto industry, which burns a ton of fossil fuels, with replacing with electric vehicles. So Michigan has one of the largest natural gas storage capacities in the country. We use 9 times more natural gas than we produced in 2017. And we're in the top 5 in the nation for residential gas use and top 10 for natural gas use. And you'll see sort of where all this storage is in the active wells. So back to sort of the air pollution and health issues. And this is what I said earlier is, I talked about some of the lung capacity issues and the lung diseases that are associated with the air pollution, but it doesn't just impact that system, it impacts all systems. So air pollution has been linked to strokes, Alzheimer's and dementia, loss of intellectual capacity. Again, respiratory health, so asthma, COPD, lung cancer, reduced lung function and size. And then cardiovascular, coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, and arrhythmias, and congestive heart failure. All of these things can be linked directly to air pollution. Estimates are 4.2 million deaths a year that are linked to outdoor air pollution. If you add in indoor, there's 7 million premature deaths. And then globally, 1 in 9 from exposure to pollution, both indoors and outdoors. And I'm going to talk when we get to policies also about some things that also help with indoor air pollution. So who's most at risk? Again, the vulnerable communities we talked about before, the frontline communities, pregnant women, children, people with pre-existing conditions, those who don't necessarily live near a coal plant are still affected by this pollution because it's all carried by the wind. So 1.8 million Michiganders still live in areas that have unacceptable levels of particulate matter. To its estimate, and again, these are all estimates, 275 people and 640 experience serious illness each year from exposure to air pollution. We're 5th in the nation for premature deaths, hospital admissions, and heart attacks attributed to coal-fired power plants pollution. And in healthcare costs, it costs us about $15 billion a year. Another chart about mortality, morbidity rates in Michigan. Again, coal-fired electric generation. So on to climate change. And this is where natural gas is really critical that we not bet on it for the next 40 years because we need to reach zero emissions and we need to do it soon. Fossil fuel combustion is the leading contributor to climate change, and that's across the board in every sector. And that's natural gas, that's coal, and that's petroleum, in the transportation sector. Coal has the highest carbon content, but again, natural gas has the highest methane. So by sources, one of the things you'll see is electricity generation is still the highest source of carbon emissions, but transportation is actually pretty high too. It's just about a third of the carbon emissions. And so unless we actually deal with the transportation sector, we're not going to fix this. I mean, we're all working very hard to try and change the way we get energy, but transportation sector has to be addressed. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And then industry, residential and commercial, and other combustion. So what is climate change? Warming temperatures from the burning of fossil fuels create a blanket that keeps our surface temperatures warm. As a result, we see extreme weather events, rising sea levels, lack of biodiversity, and again, going back to those sort of frontline, most impacted communities. That's where you get things like heat islands and all sorts of problems that are faced on a day-to-day basis because of climate change. So extreme heat, poor air quality, increased rain and flooding. We've seen increasing superstorms and increasing floods across the country over the last several years. And then insect-borne diseases, which Mara knows I always talk about because as we've seen, as it's gotten warmer here in Michigan, there are more bugs and there are more diseases that are carried by bugs that live longer. The less deep freeze we have, and we had a pretty mild winter, means that we're going to see more mosquitoes this year. The standing water means we're going to see more mosquitoes this year. And then there's also just psychological damage from the trauma that people experience from having to deal with all of these impacts. And that doesn't even begin to get into issues globally where you see droughts and famine and migration patterns because of devastation of economies and ability to grow food. So climate change is not something in the future, it's happening now. And we don't have a ton of time to actually address it. So you can see here in Michigan, this is Illinois and Michigan, that we've actually gotten significantly warmer over the last several years. And what we're looking at by 2030, we're looking at it getting lower. I'm trying to point at it and I realize I can't do that on the screen. So basically, like what the temperature is and the weather patterns we are seeing now are going to be a lot more like Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas over the next several decades. And that's really sort of a terrifying thing because obviously Michigan is very dependent on agriculture. This will change everything in the way we grow things. The lake levels will lower. And I think we've all seen some of the storms that have been happening around Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas over the last several years, and that's something that we really can't see here. So now that I got through all the depressing stuff, there are actual solutions, and we are working toward them. It's slow going, but there's some promising things happening and some ways to get involved. So the best thing to do is to replace all the coal-fired powered plants and all of the natural gas plants with alternatives that are renewable, like wind and solar and geothermal. Renewable energy is actually getting cheaper as we speak. It gets cheaper every year. It's already and has been for a few years now cheaper than building a new coal plant. Right now, it's not cheaper than building new natural gas, and that's because the price of natural gas is so low right now. But even that, the numbers are getting more and more comparable. And as things like storage increase, then those costs and the ability to generate at a larger scale become easier and easier. If we produce 25% of our energy from renewable sources by 2030, we could reduce annual health damages by more than $1 billion per year. So the top 7 renewable energy sources in 2020, solar was the top one, then wind, hydrogen, ocean energy, hydropower, geothermal, and bio. Most of what we do here in Michigan is focused on wind and solar, certainly at the Public Service Commission, which I will get into because I'm sure that's something that you haven't had to deal with yet. The other really important way to deal with these issues is by increasing energy efficiency or energy waste reduction. Energy efficiency and energy waste reduction are actually the same thing. So you'll hear them used interchangeably here in Michigan. If you go outside Michigan, you probably will never hear the term energy waste reduction. You'll just hear energy efficiency. Energy waste reduction was adopted as a term a few years back by really the Republican legislature and governor to make it more palatable. So in some ways, it's just a political term of art, but in Michigan, we call it energy waste reduction. So energy efficiency or energy waste reduction basically is energy we don't use. It's building more efficient homes and buildings, air sealing, caulking, updating your furnace, doing Energy Star appliances, installing new lighting, adding more insulation. And all of those things make a building more efficient. It's cost effective. For every dollar invested in energy efficiency, customers avoid 4.35 in energy costs. So it reduces people's energy bills, but it also reduces the need to generate power. And so one of the things we've been working on is to really increase the amount of energy efficiency investments by the utilities, because the more we invest in energy efficiency now, the less they have to generate now, which means the less they have to build for the future. And that means that gives the time that's needed for the battery storage that I talked about to improve, for the costs of renewables to go down, and means we don't have to bet really the next 40 years on natural gas, which is what utilities often would like to do because it's cheap right now. So renewable energy costs are going down to build, but once it's built, those costs are pretty standard. They're not volatile the way natural gas is. Because natural gas is cheap right now, but there's certainly no guarantee that it will remain that way. So investment in energy efficiency keeps us from having to generate that new power while we sort of wait this out. This is just an energy efficiency scorecard, just rates like what states and what their different states are doing. Michigan is 11 to 20, so we're doing not horribly right now. We're certainly not one of the best, but we're not one of the worst. And that's because of the law that exists, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So, energy efficiency policies. This is really about reducing costs in the home. Every investment in energy efficiency in the home improves quality of life. It can improve the air quality in the home. It reduces the need to burn new fossil fuels, as I said. It reduces energy costs, so it reduces the energy burden on people who are struggling to pay their electric and gas bills. I'll get into the low income housing issues in a little bit. So again, here are some examples of different efficiency measures that can be done: insulation, heating systems, cooking systems, and then ventilation as well. And so all of these, as you can see, have both housing impacts as far as comfort and livability, but also as far as health outcomes related to temperature control, reduce of asthma exacerbations and respiratory problems. So, really making the investments into the home can make a big difference in a person's health. So I want to briefly talk about federal mitigation efforts. I'll say that for the last 4 years, this has been my only slide on federal mitigation efforts because there haven't been any. So I was very happy this year to be able to include actual plans for federal mitigation efforts and things that we are actually getting involved in. There's going to be a presentation soon about energy justice and affordability, and I'll get more into that, into the American Jobs Plan and some of the details around housing and energy efficiency in that presentation. But this is just a basic sort of summary of what's in the American Jobs Plan. These are not bills yet, these are just part of the plan, but there's significant investments in all sorts of different things that relate to both jobs and climate, as well as the family plan, which includes dealing with the caretaking economy. So as far as in the home, there's a significant amount of money for clean drinking water and service lines, high-speed broadband, but there's also $100 billion for really investing in electrical infrastructure. And that means the service lines, all the things that connect generation, which will also help with efficiency, as well as getting the grid ready for more and more renewables to come online. There's a lot of money in affordable and sustainable housing. Most of that money is actually focused on both health and safety issues in the home and energy efficiency and deep retrofits. And then there's some of that money also for public schools, and then there's money there for veteran centers as well. Transportation infrastructure, there's the investments in what you traditionally think of as infrastructure, like highways, bridges, roads, airports, rail, ports, all of that. But there's also a significant amount in public transit. I said earlier we have to deal with the transportation sector if we're really going to combat climate change. There are sort of two ways of doing that. One really important way is to get people out of single-use vehicles. So that gets done by increasing accessibility and availability of public transit, as well as through education and getting people to actually use it. But it's been shown that younger people really want good transit, and they want cars less and less. So this is something I've worked on for the last several years. I'm hoping that at some point in the near future we will end up with a decent public transportation system across all of Southeast Michigan. We tried in 2016 to get that started. 2016 being a strange year, it lost by less than half a point across 4 counties. So the hope is to bring some proposal back and actually get us to the point where we have accessible public transportation in Southeast Michigan soon. And some of this money that is being proposed in this plan would actually be able to go to our local transit agencies and to our different regional transit authorities with both grants, but also federal matching funds. And so but in order to do that, we have to actually have that transportation infrastructure. Electric vehicles is the other big piece of it. This money would really be focused on a number of things, like research and development, which is also down here. There's pieces of it in both. But also building the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure that's needed across the country so that every place is electric vehicle ready. Additionally, there are some equity considerations that are part of this plan. So there's already been an executive order with a broad climate and environmental justice executive order to study environmental justice, figure out how to address disparities, with recommendations that would meet 40% of overall benefits flowing to disadvantaged communities and those that have been most impacted by climate change. Another piece is that there's a carve out for rural communities impacted by the transition to clean energy as well. So there are some equity pieces that have been included in this plan. What we see come out of all of this, we don't know yet because there's going to be negotiations forever. What I'm going to be doing along with a number of partners is really trying to, as these negotiations go forward, fight for those things that we want, to remain in the plan, where, as people start to try and cut things out, we want to make sure that those investments in efficiency are there, that the investments in electric vehicles are there, and that the equity piece is elevated the whole time. And this is just, this photo is a picture of sort of one of the places where this actually is important. The former Black Bottom neighborhood in Detroit has 375 going through it, or has 75 going through it, and then 375 cutting through here, right down the middle of it. And so that's one of those communities that would benefit from these infrastructure dollars because they were impacted by the highway design. Black Bottom neighborhood was a thriving Black neighborhood with businesses, and then 375 was built, and basically that land was taken and cleared out for the freeway, and that community never rebuilt the same way. So these would be dollars that go into those neighborhoods that were displaced by this freeway. So let's move on to state energy policies, which is where the bulk of my work is. So I'm going to go back a little bit. In 2008, there was a comprehensive energy policy passed, and that was under Governor Granholm. And what that did was required that that Michigan utilities reach 10% of their energy generation in renewables by 2015. And also required that all utilities do 1% per year in energy efficiency. So that went forward, and they were meeting those goals in 2015, and it was set to expire, and it did sunset in 15. And we had been working on it for a while and ended up passing Public Acts 341 and 342 in 2016. So I say this, just to sort of let you know about this little gap, because it often happens and we have to plan a little bit for something down the road that may not be able to get through this year, even though we're facing a sunset, and we are at this point with the 2016 legislation. So the 2016 legislation required that electric providers achieve a portfolio that included 15% renewable energy by 2021. And they're on track to do that. It also required, it didn't change the energy waste reduction programs. They still had to meet 1% per year, but there were incentives that were put in to get them to go beyond that to 1.5. In the last integrated resource plan, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, the Michigan Public Service Commission told DTE they actually needed to meet 2%. So it's going to be 2% going forward under that piece of the law, but the standard is not there. Why that matters is, and I showed you that map of sort of how we're doing compared to other states on energy efficiency, and we were doing generally relatively well. That's because we have an energy efficiency or EWR standard in place. What we've discovered in looking at other states is that when no standard exists in the law, the utilities don't do it. So unless they're ordered to, they don't do it. And the law for the Public Act 341 and 342 requirements for meeting energy efficiency goals does sunset at the end of 2021. So the other thing that the law did was it required all the regulated utilities, and examples of regulated utilities are the big ones like DTE Consumers, UPCO, which handles a lot of the UP, Indiana Michigan Power. Those are all regulated utilities. There are also smaller utilities that are municipals like Holland or Lansing Board of Water and Light. And then there are cooperative utilities such as Cherryland up in Traverse City area. And they have different regulations on them. So only the regulated utilities, which are the big ones, have to file what's called an integrated resource plan. That determines really all aspects of energy generation and energy waste reduction and rate setting for the next 5 years, but plans out 20 years. So, the reason I talked about the, lag in time between the 2008 and when it expired in 2015 and getting the new law in 2016 is, like I said, some of these rules sunset in 2021. Now, we face, several political realities that can make it difficult. I don't think that anyone expects that we will be able to pass any kind of large-scale energy package during this legislative session, which goes through 2021 and 2022. We have a 2-year session. It's just unlikely. There's not the appetite at the Capitol. There's a lot of partisan fighting, and there is just the issue of, sort of getting out of COVID and where all that money is going. And there's huge fights over the budget right now. So a huge energy package is just unlikely to get through, and the amount of work it would take is not something the legislature really is interested in pursuing right now. The chances of a new energy package moving is more likely to happen after the 2022 elections and redistricting. So we are planning for that future. We're introducing legislation with our partners and working with friendly legislators who we assume will be there after 2022. And we'll be sort of pursuing that as a larger package at that point. But for now, we're looking at a lot of standalone policies because there are smaller things that can make a difference. And so solar access, there's actually a bill right now. Right now, there is a cap on how much of their customer load can be part of distributed generation, which is basically rooftop solar, that they have to pay sort of the higher market rate for. And so that bill would eliminate this cap, because as long as the cap is in place and consumers' energy has already met their cap and DTE is close, it really sort of kills the solar industry because it no longer makes it really cost effective for somebody to put solar panels on the roof. There's also tax policies related to solar and how they get charged on property taxes, different energy financing policies, including things like on-bill financing. And then most of my work is focused around the energy efficiency. There's also transportation policies around electric vehicles and expanding electrification. This part in the middle here is sort of where I've been mostly focused for the last couple of years. So there's something about a health and safety fund. I think I've got a slide on it afterwards. But basically, a health and safety fund would address those issues in the home that don't actually produce energy efficiency, but are needed to be done for energy efficiency measures to be installed. expansion of shut-off protections, and coordination of weatherization and energy efficiency program. There are certain measures that are very specifically for energy efficiency, and then there are things that are weatherization, like insulation, even though they also contribute to energy efficiency. And how they get funded is very different. So coordinating those efforts is a really critical piece. And then along with other home interventions, we want to make sure that when we're replacing windows to make a home more energy efficient, we're not opening up walls that have lead and opening up windows and poisoning a house. So we want those remediation efforts, and there's a lot of money right now that's going into lead remediation. We want those dollars and those agencies to work with the agencies that are doing the weatherization and energy efficiency, so that all of these things can be done holistically to make the homes healthier and safer and cheaper to live in. Okay, so here's the health and safety. And like I said, this is a big piece of what I've been doing. What we discovered is that a huge number of, Michigan has some of the oldest housing stock in the Midwest. Those who are of the lowest income tend to live in the oldest housing stock, and some of the unhealthiest housing stock, often because people don't have the money to invest in some of the fixes in their homes. And so the utility companies, like who I said earlier, had to make investments in energy efficiency, would go into, and these are all within income qualified households, so or low income, certain levels of the poverty rate. And so a utility would go into a home and discover that there is asbestos, or there's a leaky roof, and then there's mold and moisture that have gotten in because of the leaky roof, or there's structural issues in the home, or knob and tube electrical systems. And what all of these issues mean is that you can't do the energy efficiency work, because you can't add insulation, you can't add a high efficiency furnace, in a house that has knob and tube. You can't add insulation in a place that's infiltrated with mold or has roof leaks. And so what happens is these homes, the energy efficiency stuff is then deferred. And so what we're working to do is create funds, and we've established pilot programs within DTE and Consumers Energy in the last 2 years, and are now looking for funding from the state for a statewide program, just a small program so far, but the hope will be that for it to get bigger, but to cover these health and safety interventions in low-income households so that energy efficiency measures can be done. That gets us to what's going on right now in Lansing. As I said before, everything is budget right now. So there is a recommendation on the Health and Safety Fund, and like I said, it's not a ton of money right now, but it's never been in the state budget. And we pushed for it to go in last year and were not successful, but the governor did put a recommendation for a $5 million budget line item in the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services budget for Health and Safety Fund to address these issues. We've been talking to legislators. The Senate has not come out with their recommendation, or the Senate did not recommend including any funding, but we managed to make a little headway in the House, and they included a $100 placeholder. Obviously, a difference between $100 and $5 million is pretty significant. And we are certainly going to work and fight to get that number back up again. But the fact that they actually put the placeholder in at all is a really good sign. It means that they didn't reject the idea entirely. So that's something we'll be working on over the next month and a half, really, for this year. And then if it doesn't get in, then we'll be working on it again for next year. If it does get in, then we'll be working to make sure that it keeps getting increased. LIHEAP is the federal funding for energy assistance. Some of that money can be used for weatherization. The thing about energy assistance, and again, this will be something we get into a lot on the energy justice and affordability presentation that's a couple weeks off. But energy assistance helps people pay their bills, which is really critical, especially right now. That being said, if you keep putting money into just helping people pay their bills without ever making the investments into programs that reduce their energy costs and thereby reduce their bills, then people are just caught in that same cycle over and over again. There has been a very small amount, $6 million of the LIHEAP funding that has been put into weatherization for the last several years. We're trying to increase that to 15 million. Again, the House has said, has actually agreed to it. The Senate has not actually submitted that subcommittee's budget yet, so we don't know what they're going to do. But the whole goal is really getting people out of the cycle of being unable to pay their bills and unable to afford their energy. There's also a ton of money coming in for LIHEAP under the COVID relief plan that passed. And so we'll be again, asking for, additional funding from that to go toward weatherization. And I'm almost done. Michigan Public Service Commission, which I mentioned a couple times. The Michigan Public Service Commission is a really wonky agency that most people don't know about. But they make really every decision about how utilities work, or at least the regulated utilities like DTE and consumers. So what they can, how they generate their energy, they make decisions on what rates you pay, they make decisions on how much energy efficiency they need to put into their whole portfolio, but also into different programs like those that are income qualified. And so for the last several years, a lot of our work has been done at the Public Service Commission. Why this matters? There's a lot actually happening all the time. There are rate cases that are going to be filed later this summer and in the fall from both consumers and DTE asking for rate increases for both electricity and gas. And that has a real life impact on people's ability to pay. And people are often forced to make decisions about, sort of what bills do you pay? And so we're doing a lot of work around affordability. As far as, addressing issues of energy generation and climate change, this is where the integrated resource plans come. The law that was passed required that these utilities file and get approval every 5 years. They're actually doing things a little bit ahead of schedule because things are changing quickly and because it's a lot in order to actually do an integrated resource plan. Process includes modeling of sort of energy generation out for 25 years, forecasts of supply and demand, what types of different scenarios could happen, and a proposed course of action. Consumers' next integrated resource plan will be filed in June. We are working with a large coalition of advocates, environmental and local activists, to get ahead of that as far as some of the messaging. We want to see more renewables, less gas, more investment in energy efficiency. We do not want them betting the next 20 years on gas. And so, we will be doing all sorts of, sort of letters, media, letters to the editor, as well as intervening directly into the case. It's basically a legal proceeding where we provide expert witnesses and testimony. And so we're in a coalition that intervenes in these cases as well. But there's going to be opportunities for public engagement. There will be time for public comment. And so, if this is something you're interested in, we would love to have you, and we will help you, write things up if you, want to. So an interesting thing happened with DTE's last integrated resource plan. It was finally approved in March of 2020. They did ultimately approve the plan, but required some changes, including increasing their energy efficiency to 2% And it was the first time in history that the Public Service Commission applied the Michigan Environmental Protection Act to a utility case, which is really critical because it meant that environmental considerations could be part of the decision. The other thing that's happening right now, and I'm actually in ongoing pre-filing settlement negotiations with consumers and DTE Energy. Both of them will be filing their energy waste reduction plans this summer. And the critical piece of that is both the budget for low income as well as the program design to make sure that these programs and whatever pilots actually are doing what we need them to do. And so 2 years ago, I was in negotiations and we actually did reach settlement with each of the utilities. And that's how we got the health and safety pilots in the first place. DTE was actually already interested in doing it, but we helped make it better and made it apply to multifamily low-income customers as well. Consumers originally was not interested in doing a health and safety pilot program, but now I think is even more on board than DTE is. They're really excited because they've seen huge success. Again, come to the energy justice presentation, you'll hear a little bit more. The other thing that's happened is there's a low-income energy waste reduction work group that was created in 2018. And so it's a really great space with advocates, community action agencies, contractors, social service organizations, Public Service Commission staff, and utilities all at the table, trying to actually address some of the issues around low-income households and energy waste reduction. There's a new group that actually just formed. We only had our first meeting. Our second meeting is later this month, specifically around energy affordability and access. And that is a new work group at the Public Service Commission that is just getting started. So if that's something you're interested in learning more about, I'll send you the link so you know when the next meeting is. And there's a really great opportunity right now to actually shape what that looks like. So. And that's all I have. And I will get back on camera and answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexis. Just to kind of kick us off, I was wondering if you could provide a couple of examples of how fellows in the past have interacted with the MPSC and some of the different ways that they've been able to provide testimony.
Sure. So we didn't do a lot beyond the legal intervention with consumers' last integrated resource plan, but we did with DTEs. In part because consumers was not altogether horrible last time DTEs was. So that made a big difference as far as sort of where we were going to focus. But we worked with our coalitions, we worked with our health fellows to both submit comments online, to sign petitions to the Public Service Commission, but also there were a few public hearings. And a couple of our fellows, there was one held downtown at Wayne County Community College in Detroit, and a couple of our health fellows actually had written testimony for the public hearing and got up and were able to speak. And it was really great because these are people who could really talk about the health impacts of what this decision was going to, how this decision would influence health impacts in those communities. We are attempting in the process of engagement around the IRPs, but also, all of the other cases, and we've been working with the MPSC staff for the last couple of years to try and really encourage more public participation and more accessibility. Like I said, most people don't even know what the Public Service Commission is, and they make decisions that really have a huge impact on people's lives. And then the way they do their meetings, I can tell you their website is impossible to navigate. So if you're, I tried to say somewhat not as wonky as I normally am, and I can tell you that I'm already too wonky. and I know this, and it's hard to try. So if you are just, a member of the general public, I mean, this work is often so technical that it's just too overwhelming, and there's not a really good way to participate. The other thing is the way they schedule their meetings, really does not allow for participation from those who are most impacted because of, middle of the day at their offices in Delta Township. The one thing that, COVID has, forced them to do is to, open this up to, at least, online participation. And so we've actually, seen more participation from, regular citizens who are interested in this. Another way that fellows can be involved is there are going to be some opportunities to reach out, do some public outreach about sort of what this even is, because that education is really necessary first. Because unless people know what kinds of impact this has on their lives, they're not going to be interested. But if they know that the Public Service Commission is about to decide whether your residential rates are going to go up 25%, which they did last year. I don't think it was 25, it was like 9, but still that's a significant jump. And the Public Service Commission, we did a meeting with a bunch of community members a couple of years ago that was sort of a MPSC 101, and we were joined by staff, and there were a lot of community members there. And I think the staff was actually stunned to hear some of the anger from the public and from the citizens. They didn't really, they're in their bubble in Delta Township in the building. And because of the way that participation has been done, they only hear from the advocates. They never hear from the people who this directly impacts. And so it was a good opportunity for them to actually, get to hear some of those views. For this new group that's been forming, we're really pushing them to have the meetings be more accessible, have them at times when people can participate, and actually to put aside some funding for community groups to participate. Because it's one thing for me and my job to drive to Delta Township for a meeting for 3 hours and drive back. It's another thing for somebody who's working with clients at the Michigan Welfare Rights organization. And so they need some funding to actually be able to participate meaningfully. So there are all sorts of ways that if you are interested, you can get involved. Both testimony, also helping get the word out, and we can talk about it for sure. Are there other questions?
Hi, Alexis. I just know from personal experience, I guess, filing my taxes, there are definitely some breaks for energy efficiency. But, we actually worked on this house. It was really old. We fixed it up and tried to do some energy efficient things. I still don't think we qualified. I know that they kind of made that. I'm not 100% familiar with the rules, but it seems like they made it a little bit tricky to actually meet those requirements. I wonder if you knew anything about that, or if that could be an incentive for residents.
Sure. So the energy efficiency, energy waste reduction plans have different programs and different levels of implementation across different sectors. So there's the commercial, the industrial, and then the residential. Within the residential, there's also the income qualified. So that is based on income and poverty level, or percent of federal poverty level. So if for income qualified, there are a lot of no-cost programs that are available. For just basic residential, there are a lot of incentives and rebates is mostly how it's done. But yes, I can tell you that it is not always easy to navigate. And the utilities have not always done the best job at getting the word out. And so that's another piece. And so within these plans, we are pushing them to put more money into education as well. But yeah, so that's really it. But if you go to your utilities website, there are things about some of the incentives. There's also some on the Public Service Commission website. Again, I said, though, their website is just a nightmare to navigate. So I can warn you that. If you work with a contractor at all, they should actually be aware of all of the incentives that are available or rebates. So you definitely want to talk to your contractor.
Thanks.
Are there other questions?
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. And maybe I do know the answer to this, but I'm not exactly sure where I would find it. So for example, if you're looking at a community or a city, where do I find this information at how much the air pollution is impacting that particular area? Is that data? Where's that data found?
Probably not with your city.
Okay.
Some of it will be put out by Eagle, and some of it will be put out by the EPA.
Okay.
So those are sort of the sites probably that are best to search.
All right.
Yeah, cities don't often actually, keep track of that data.
Okay. All right.
Or at least I shouldn't say they don't keep track of it. They may keep track of it. They don't have it out on their public website.
The other question I had is, so when we're looking at more vulnerable populations that are generally living in these homes that are that may be, they're more impacted by the inefficiencies of the homes. When we're looking at that, what is it that are there responsibilities that the city has to assess that, look at, how like I'm thinking, because I live in North Muskegon.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Muskegon, but it's a community that had been really heavily impacted by, especially like in 2008 during the big recession then, that, so there's a lot of poverty here and a lot of old homes. And I'm curious, are there guidelines, or is that just a free for all, whatever the city?
Well, the thing is, there are building codes, but those really apply to new builds or if you are doing major renovations. So if you're doing a major renovation, then you have to do it up to code. But if you're not, if you're just living in, the 100-year-old home that has, none of these efficient, no insulation, no air sealant, no nothing, as well as some of the, other conditions that, make it dangerous, unless they're at a point where the home is so dangerous that it, is something that the city would want to condemn, then there's nothing that, they would do.
Okay. And then is that also like for landlords too?
Landlords, it's a little more tricky. So, and often what the situation is with landlords depends very much on, some of the local restrictions as well as state, but also the strength of tenants groups and tenants unions to, go after bad landlords.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not, a landlord really only has to make something inhabitable.
Okay.
You don't have to make it good.
Okay.
And so, and actually sort of this health and safety thing, and I want to sort of try and differentiate a little bit between, the bad landlords who just let, the places they own just, go to, pot and, leave things a mess, like intentionally. And, there's a difference between sort of a slumlord and then there's, multifamily developers and owners in the low income space that, want to do the right thing. You don't see as many of the health and safety issues in those, but, want to do the right thing as far as energy efficiency. But the way that the like low income tax credits are structured, the way that and this is where this coordination across like all of these programs is really critical. And the fact that, they don't talk to each other, makes us absolutely bonkers. But, so there are programs that the utilities do for sort of low income multifamily. And we're pushing for higher budgets and more investment, but, to try to do some of these like whole building envelope issues, for a long time, they were doing, really the easiest measures like, a refrigerator replacement or a light bulb replacement, which is great, but it's not going to do a lot to lower somebody's costs, overall, and it's not going to really improve the quality in the building. So there are incentives with, and tax credits from multifamily low income, developers and owners to actually make, building shell improvements. When you get to things like the, single family household landlords, right now there's nothing really.
Okay.
So if, and that's one of the other things we're trying to figure out how to address, because we know that renters are often the most vulnerable, and they don't have, the autonomy over the home to say, okay, come in and do these, fixes. We don't want to help the bad landlords. We don't want to help the slumlords, by, giving them no cost fixes to their place when they then will raise rents and get rid of their low income tenants. That's something we want to make sure doesn't happen. But we want to make sure that, there is a way for renters to get the benefits of this. So there may be something, and it's still in development. We're not even sure how it's, it's hard to design because of what we're trying to avoid at the same time as trying to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Is, how do we ensure that, like a landlord who really wants to do the right thing, but this, cost is just too much to do some of these, other home investments in order to get the energy efficiency work done. Is there a percentage that they can pay? Is there something that's, less than, or that's more than the, free efficiency measures or, housing fixes, but less than sort of market rate? And, if we were to do that, can we put in some restrictions about, you can't raise rent for a certain amount of time, or, something to keep that, that home actually available to, those, renters who actually need affordable housing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're working on it, but I don't have all the answers yet.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm glad I got to see you all and meet you today. And I hope that you will join me in this fight, because there's a lot going on and there's a lot of good we can do. So, and Mar, did you already tell them about the energy justice, or is that already on their calendars?
It is on the calendar, and it was actually, it's included in my slides. So I will actually share my screen.
Okay.
I
will
and then
warn
we can
you.
take a moment to talk about that.
I will warn you that I am waiting to hear back from Tony to make sure we're still on. So I would assume that we are right now, but I'm sort of in a panic because it's been a couple days.
All right. Well, first things first, I do have, really quickly, I'm chatting out the evaluation form for today. I will also include the link to the evaluation form in the email, and it'll also be up on the website. And Alexis is alluding to a couple of upcoming events. So right now, just keep the hold for May 19th on your calendar, but it sounds like Alexis and I will be sharing some updates in the next probably week or so, depending on what particularly will be going on with that specific event. But Alexis, is there anything specific you'd like to share about the energy justice discussion that's being planned?
Yeah, I mean, I brought in a little bit of what we're talking about into this discussion, but it's really a lot more focused on, I mean, there's still a lot of energy efficiency in there, but it's a lot of the affordability work we're doing, and sort of the what energy burden actually looks like in Michigan, and sort of who are the most impacted where, and some of those solutions too. But it gets a lot deeper into the nitty gritty of the affordability issues and the health and safety and some of the other work that has been a big focus of my work for the last year or two.
Cool, thank you. So stay tuned for more information about that. I also wanted to plug that coalition that we're working with here in the state of Michigan called Filter First, where we're working on trying to get hydration stations throughout, filtered hydration stations throughout schools and daycare centers throughout the state of Michigan to ensure that children are being provided clean water that doesn't have lead contamination in it. We are planning on hosting a virtual Lansing event during the first week of June. So we're looking at hosting some meetings with legislative offices the 1st through the 3rd. So if folks are interested in maybe participating in a meeting or two throughout that week, please let me know. We'll be sharing more information about that as it becomes available. We just locked down the dates on Wednesday. So the latest and greatest news is what I have right now. And then also in June, we just secured the timeline for another event that we'll be co-hosting with the lead impacted families training. This will be discussing the health and economic impacts of lead here in the state of Michigan. One of the speakers will be Dr. Rhonda Connor-Warren, who works for Michigan State University's College of Nursing, but is also a senior fellow with the Ecology Center. So that should be a great event as well. All the details for these are up on the website. And like I said, we'll be sharing more information about them, calendar invites, and just email reminders as dates draw near and more information is available. But other than that, if folks don't have any other questions, thanks so much for joining today, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your presentation.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you both.
Thanks. Mara, can you stay on for a second?
Sure.